conference that will take place at Ghana to address the role of natural resource management in reducing economic and social inequalities in ECOWAS region. Global Right, in partnership with Integrated Social Development Center, organized a pre-conference held at Abuja, the nation's capital. Nwadishi Faith, the executive director, Center for Transparency Advocacy, said poverty is taking hold of the country and integrating the people is the only solution.
We're so blessed, yet we are so poor. Why? Why the disparity? And the impact is more on women. Every time you talk about resources, natural resources, it's exploitation. You see inequalities and all of the indicators of inequalities more on the people who are closer to the resources. So you find those who are far away from the resources being the major beneficiaries, while those who are closer to the resources are not benefiting, and a majority of these are women. When we talk about women, people think that we are overemphasizing these issues, but that's the reality.
Tengi George, a senior officer of Natural Resource Governance Institute, said in the next 10 to 15 years to come, Nigeria oil resource will be reduced drastically.
A huge elephant that is facing Nigeria at the moment, as well as African countries, that is not being considered even enough. In the next 10 years to 15 years, this resource from oil will have its demand depressing. What does that mean? It means that the revenue that we get, that we're saying is not enough now to service our debts, will reduce even further.
Mr. Monday Osasha, Executive Director, Center for LSD, stated that injustice among Nigeria is still part of inequality and needs to be tackled.
When we talk about inequality, we're essentially talking about injustice. We are talking of inequity, unequalness, even in the distribution of opportunities that exist in the extractive sector. The women are the worst hit. Because if you want to measure vulnerability, the main people that you really talk about are women and children. And we have seen over the years that even though all of us have been talking about the Sustainable Development Goals that has the overarching mantra of leaving no one behind, the women folk has been left behind. And they have been left behind by way of discrimination. They have been left behind by way of their socioeconomic status.
Dr. Becker, an assistant director with NESRA, said the government should protect the rights of humans, including the environmental rights.
So one of the hallmarks of good governance is that institutions that actually protect human rights and which environmental rights are actually part of human rights, by the way, must be strengthened. They must be able to do their jobs properly. They must have the tools, the right training, whatever they need to be able to carry out these things. There has to be rule of law too. We can't actually do things that, okay, this person is untouchable, that person is touchable, that kind of thing. So there has to be rule of law.
Abiodun Bayewu, the executive director of Global Rights, said putting power in the hands of ordinary Nigeria and allowing ordinary Nigeria to decide what happened to their natural resources will go a long way to end inequality.
Nigeria is one of the richest resource countries in the world, and yet that our poverty levels are extremely high, that it's not translating to wealth for citizens, and the gap, the inequality gaps are just too wide. Some of the issues that have been identified, of course, are the mismanagement of natural resources, conflicting policies by governments, the failure to look at the impact of climate change on natural resource governance, state capture continues, state capture, impunity and corruption continue to be a resounding theme around these issues, and so that we also just need to look at these issues and think about how to deal with these issues effectively.
Obiageli Onuora, the acting director, Communication Stakeholders Management, said corruption will always be, except if the country is able to address the issue of poverty and build knowledge-based system.
We're asking ourselves that question. Does natural resource governance promote or facilitate inequality? And then you can also look at it the other way. If it does, how can you also use natural resource governance to address inequality in our socioeconomic lives? And so, if you're able to answer these two questions, the SDGs, Sustainable Development Goals 10, is talking about reducing inequality. And while I was making my remarks earlier, I said if you look at the SDG 6, if you look at the SDG 4, if you look at the SDG 12, all of them seem to be linked to addressing or reducing the SDG 10, which is reducing inequality. So, using natural resource governance or managing our natural resources revenues efficiently, how can we use that tool? How can we use this very resource to reduce inequality, the inequality of income disparity, the inequality of gender inclusion or exclusion, the inequality of beneficiation or benefit sharing at the community level? How can you use the natural resource governance to reduce these inequalities, particularly when it comes to those who are supposed to be benefiting from our natural resources?
Abosede Adepoju, G24 TV International News.